have to follow it up on a further round. Monsieur Mulcair.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Alors, à mon tour, il me fait plaisir de souhaiter le bienvenue aux participants aujourd'hui. J'aimerais commencer avec un mot pour les représentants syndicaux d'énergie et du papier. D'abord parce qu'ils représentent nos employés. Le NPD est fièrement la seule formation politique sur la colline dont les membres sont syndiqués, dont les employés sont syndiqués. Et vous les représentez extrêmement bien. Aussi, je voulais vous dire, de notre côté, on va tout faire pour essayer de vous aider. Vous êtes en train de mettre le doigt sur le réel problème de la crise actuelle, que des gens qui ont épargné toute leur vie, qui ont mis une partie de leur salaire, c'est du salaire mis de côté pour leur pension, sont en train de se le faire voler. C'est inadmissible dans notre société. Et je vous remercie pour le ton et le contenu de votre présentation. J'aimerais commencer avec Mme Wambold et M. Raymond. Madame Wambold, j'aimerais bien, mais vous n'êtes pas dans le rapport annuel de l'année dernière. Je vais me concentrer sur votre collègue, M. Raymond. Bonjour. M. Raymond, votre salaire de base est de 325 000 $ par année, du moins ça l'était dans le rapport annuel 2007-2008. C'est bien ça? C'est bien ça? Votre hochement de tête n'apparaîtrait pas dans la transcription.
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct. You realize that your base salary is greater than the base salary of the Prime Minister and of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
I was not aware of that.
You are now.
Okay.
In 2007-2008, you were also paid several $1 million bonus. Is that correct?
That's correct.
This year, we just learned through your colleague, Madame Wambold, that in the first 3 quarters of the fiscal 08-09, you've lost $13 billion. We don't know what the final result is. We won't know that for another couple of weeks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware of the fact that a lot of Canadians would find it inadmissible for you to again be paying yourself large bonuses this year, even though Mrs. Wambold said there will be downward pressure? Her words were chosen carefully. This is a public institution. Your base salary is greater than the salary of the Prime Minister, is greater than the salary of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Are you aware of the impact on the CPP investment plan if you give yourselves bonuses in the context where you've lost billions of dollars of the money that's been put aside by people for their pensions?
I think to look at our overall performance system that we have in place that's determined by our board, it has several key principles which I think it's important to focus on. First, it rewards performance over the long term. So short-term periods definitely have an impact, but it is meant to match and align our interests with the long-term interests of the fund. We measure those then over 4-year periods. It's also measured on a pay-for-performance basis, which I outlined earlier in my response to Mr. McCallum.
You made that point in your presentation. We all have it in writing. Now I'm asking you a question of trust based on your role as fiduciaries of public money. You head a public institution. You're not in the private sector. You lost $13 billion in the first 3 quarters of last year. The money lost overall will no doubt be greater than that once we get the overall figures. Is it not ethically important for you to understand that Canadian taxpayers and the contributors to that plan will not put up with you paying yourselves bonuses under that circumstance?
First of all, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to clarify a few points. So first of all, our Board of Directors is the organization that determines incentive payments to executive officers and approves compensation for the entire organization. And as my colleague pointed out, it's the 4-year performance both at the value-added level and total fund returns which drives primarily the long-term incentive programs. Over the last 4 years, the fund has generated over $10 billion of investment income. As a management organization, we've added over $5 billion in value added. And it's important to look at these long time horizons because that's aligned not only with the mission, but if you look at what regulators, central bankers, finance ministers have said, including our own central bank governor, Mark Carney, and Prime Minister Flaherty, it's focused on short term. In fact,
Flaherty's going to be thrilled at the promotion you just gave him.
Sorry, Finance Minister Flaherty. It's this focus on short-term results, in fact, 1-year results, that many would point to as one of the primary causes of the global financial crisis.
That's well said, Mr. Raymond, but I think it might also be pointed out that greed, excess compensation is also one of the reasons that we're in such difficulty worldwide. A lot of people would agree with that too. You paid yourself several $1 million in addition to a base salary that exceeds that of the Prime Minister, this time correctly stated, and the the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. My question to you has to do with ethics. Right now, you have someone responsible within your organization to develop a culture of integrity and ethical conduct. If I'm not mistaken, it's a former former Justice of the Supreme Court right now.
That's right.
Before that, up until recently, it was Perty Crawford, wasn't it?
Correct.
Up until when was it Mr. Crawford?
I'm sorry, I don't know the exact date.
You don't know?
It was a couple of years ago.
It was before my time, so it was a couple of years ago.
Okay. Let's get back to the question of compensation. In your presentation, you talked about benchmarks. During the 07-08 year, the one for which you were all paid several $1 million in bonuses, do you disclose the benchmarks for private markets, in other words, real estate, private equity, and infrastructure, in your policy portfolio? And if not, without disclosing those benchmarks, how will we ever know if the value added was really value added or just due to the leverage used in those investments?
So let me start by just talking about the reference portfolio, which is our baseline, which is set by the board of directors, and that's a passive portfolio designed to deliver the returns and help sustain the CPP.
Your bonuses are based on benchmarks. My question had to do specifically with the benchmarks in the private markets.
Sure. Don, do you want to describe the benchmark?
Very briefly, we have about 45
We'll
seconds.
have time to come back to it in the second round.
Sure. There are two different components of value added. One of them is due to broader diversification of the portfolio, and one of them is to value added relative to specific benchmarks. So in fact, we measure total performance relative to the reference portfolio. Private equity, for example, does include an additional premium due to the higher leverage in private companies relative to their public market counterparts. So in fact, there is a premium over which they have to earn returns to compensate for the leverage in private markets.
Aren't you transparent in the benchmarks governing these private market investments? You're not in your annual report.
Just a quick response.
Our annual report gives, I think it's 14 pages of disclosure on our compensation plan, and our annual report this year will be as thorough as it was in the past in its disclosure.
Okay.
And isn't it possible that it's because you can't game the
Mr.
public market
Mr.
benchmarks as
Mulcair.
easily as you can game the
Mulcair.
private market
Mr. Mulcair,
benchmarks?
you will have
We'll
a
get through the second round.
You'll have
Thanks.
a second round. Thank you. Mr. McKay, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, witnesses. And just following up there, here we have a public board, and the compensation is